In the late 1980s, when Škoda was still independent from the Volkswagen Group, the Czechoslovak carmaker made its final push on its own. Just a few years before the Iron Curtain fell, one car crossed the finish line first and became a bridge between a fading past and an approaching future. Today, the story of the Škoda Favorit, the car that appeared at exactly the right moment of a turning point and didn't let its creators down. Rear-engine Škodas had enjoyed genuine affection from Czechoslovak drivers since the early 1960s, and motorists across Eastern Europe often preferred them to their regional counterparts, the Wartburgs and Dacias of the time. Even Soviet Ladas were not always the obvious choice when compared side by side with a Škoda, and peculiar local creations like the Trabant or the Polish-built Fiat hardly stood a chance in direct comparison. Much of this affection was practical. With rear-wheel drive and the engine mounted over the axle, these cars offered excellent traction on snow and wet roads, a crucial advantage in a region where winters were long, cold, and relentlessly icy. The simple engineering made them easy to service in a home garage, and most components could be repaired with basic tools. Škodas earned a reputation for being economical to run, durable, and remarkably tolerant of poor quality fuel and rough operating conditions. But there was also another reason. Unlike many socialist-era cars, Czechoslovak models, and Škoda in particular, enjoyed a higher level of trust. They looked more modern, carried a distinctly European sense of design, with clean lines, balanced proportions, and a comfortable interior. They felt like honest cars, basic, affordable, but solid and well-made. However, time was catching up with them. By the mid-70s, it had become clear that the rear-engine layout was slowly but steadily becoming obsolete, and a transition to a modern front-engined, front-wheel drive platform was only a matter of time. Engineers in Czechoslovakia explored possible solutions within the socialist bloc, and even entered discussions with factories in East Germany, in Eisenach and Zwickau, which produced the front-wheel drive Wartburg and Trabant. But the cooperation led only to a handful of prototypes, and Škoda's own attempts, such as the experimental Project 780, failed to deliver a convincing result. The end of the rear-engined era was clear not only to Škoda's engineers, but also to the Czechoslovak government. And in late 1982, the factory in Mladá Boleslav received a direct order to develop an entirely new car. The deadlines were strict. The full cycle, from the first sketches to mass production, had to be completed in just 5 years, and the design phase was expected to finish even earlier, by the summer of 1985. For the early 1980s, this was almost unrealistic. With no computer simulations and limited automation, most engineering work was done by hand, and the new model required a completely different platform from anything Škoda had built before. To meet such a schedule, the project needed strong leadership. Petr Hrdlička, head of Škoda's Research Institute, was appointed chief engineer. For the exterior design, Škoda first approached Ital Design, but after previous Škoda concepts failed to reach production, Giorgetto Giugiaro showed little interest. The company then turned to Bertone and received a yes. Nuccio Bertone personally took charge of the styling. In just 4 months, he completed the design, and by late 1983, a full-scale model was delivered from Italy to Czechoslovakia. A year later, Stile Bertone built the first prototype body. Meanwhile, work in Czechoslovakia was moving just as quickly. By 1984, Škoda engineers, with support from several foreign suppliers, had developed the powertrain, suspension components, and brake systems. When the Italian body was combined with these mechanicals, the factory in Mladá Boleslav produced the first prototype of the new model, right on schedule, in June 1985. Italy delivered 19 different body design proposals, but the final structural layout, its integration with the mechanicals, and all technical documentation for mass production were completed by Škoda's own team. Compared to the old rear-engine cars, the number of stamped body parts was almost halved, from 405 to 227, and the interior became noticeably roomier, gaining roughly 8 centimeters of usable space despite the slightly shorter body. The Prague Automotive Institute assisted with accelerated durability tests that simulated 100,000 kilometers of driving in just a week. And on real roads, the pre-production Favorit covered no less, around 250,000 kilometers, from alpine mountain passes to the scorching heat of the Mediterranean. Alongside the work with Bertone, Skoda collaborated with nearly 24 foreign suppliers. Porsche assisted with engine mounts, front suspension geometry, and noise insulation. Girling provided the braking system, Mala supplied the piston group, and Bow delivered suspension components. In total, Skoda spent about one-fifth of the project's budget on licenses. One question may come to mind: why buy licenses at all, when it would have been cheaper simply to copy the technology? After all, in the socialist bloc, demand for cars far exceeded supply. But this is a misconception. Licenses were essential for exports. Eastern Bloc countries operated within the same European legal framework, and patent violations could easily lead to lawsuits and a ban on selling the car abroad. Styling can be interpreted, but copying mechanical technology is a direct infringement. And despite the political divide, technical cooperation between East and West did exist and was often mutually beneficial. For socialist manufacturers, purchasing licenses for modern components was a standard and necessary practice. The new model debuted at the engineering fair in Brno in September 1987. Compared to Škoda's old rear-engine cars, the new hatchback looked almost like something from another era. Bertone's sharp, angular styling could easily have belonged to any Western European brand, and the public embraced the Favorit right away. It was a local success, but an important one. Technically, the Favorit followed the modern formula of its class: front-wheel drive, a transversely mounted engine tilted forward by 20 degrees, McPherson struts up front, a semi-independent rear axle, and rack and pinion steering. The four-cylinder, 8-valve carbureted engine, either 1.1 or 1.3 liters, produced between 58 and 63 horsepower. The only real throwback was the old-fashioned OHV valve train with the camshaft mounted in the block. Cars like the Skoda Favorit were built as affordable family vehicles, simple, easy to maintain, and meant for ordinary buyers. It wasn't trying to compete with more expensive Western models. It was a way to finally get a brand new car for the price of a used one. And that's exactly how it should be judged, within its own class, not by the standards of cars that cost twice as much. On Western markets, the Favorit made its case right away with its price. In Germany, a brand new Skoda Favorit cost 14,150 Deutschmarks, almost half the price of most compact cars in the Golf segment. In terms of budget, it sat closer to a Fiat Uno or a Peugeot 205, and even there it held its ground. And to put things into perspective, even the Lada Samara, sold in West Germany for about 15 to 16,000 marks, ended up more expensive than the Favorit, and still felt rougher in build quality and interior finish. This is where the Favorit's appeal became clear. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It offered exactly what people expected from it: a straightforward, neatly put together everyday car. And in its segment, it was arguably the most sensible and down-to-earth choice among the affordable Eastern European cars of that era. But the Favorit didn't go on sale right after its debut, not in Czechoslovakia and not for export. The first cars were delivered to state institutions, where it was easier to track failures, gather real feedback, and fix issues quietly, without giving the press a chance to tear the car apart before it even reached the public. The first production Favorit reached buyers only in 1988, almost a year after its premiere, priced at 84,000 Czechoslovak crowns. Converting socialist currencies is tricky, but by rough calculation, that's about $6,300 in 2025 money. At that price, the Favorit was actually the most expensive car among its Eastern Bloc peers, competitors like the Polonaise or the Romanian-built Dacia. Still, despite the price, the Favorit was met quite warmly. One thing, however, puzzled everyone equally: the trunk, a laughably small 251 liters. For comparison, even the tiny Fiat Uno had a larger cargo area, and cars of similar size offered far more space. The reason was simple: Nuccio Bertone. To achieve a sleeker, more dynamic silhouette, he noticeably cut the rear of the car. The solution from Skoda was straightforward. They built a station wagon on the same base and gave it its own name: Foreman. What's interesting is how deeply the two bodies were unified. The hatchback and the wagon actually shared the exact same tailgate. That kept production costs down and made manufacturing easier. As for the Bertoni-designed sedan and coupe, they never made it to production. The coupe is easy to understand, it's a niche thing. But why the sedan was dropped remains a mystery, especially since it looked decent and quite attractive. In the end, only 2 prototypes were built before the project was quietly shelved. But the Favorit story wasn't limited to sales figures. The car proved itself in motorsport as well. In 1989, the Favorit entered the World Rally Championship. In 1990, it competed in several events across Czechoslovakia and Europe. And from 1991 to 1994, the crew of Petr Gross and Pavel Sibera scored 4 consecutive class victories at the legendary Monte Carlo rally. The Velvet Revolution of late 1989 didn't kill the Favorit, but it made one thing very clear. A former socialist factory would struggle to survive in a market economy without a strong foreign partner. And that partner became Volkswagen. Or rather, it was Volkswagen that showed real interest in bringing Skoda into the group. The move made sense. Before the Second World War, Skoda had been a serious player on the global market, and Czech engineering had always had a reputation for precision and technical culture. Even the Favorit, developed in late socialist Czechoslovakia, proved good enough for Volkswagen to keep it in production after 1991. The Germans simply tightened the build quality and updated the technology to Western standards. The easiest way to spot the modernized version is the Skoda badge moved to the center of the grille. That same year, 1991, Skoda also launched a pickup based on the Favorit platform. A more noticeable update followed in early 1993. The marketing emphasized that the car received over 500 improvements. Among them were fuel injection, an intermittent wiper mode, a tachometer instead of a clock, and a rear seat that folded in a 60-40 split. Visually, this version is identified by a small ventilation slot at the bottom of the grille, just below the emblem. The Favorit hatchback remained in production until 1994, while the Foreman wagon and the pickup continued for another year. In total, Skoda built over 1 million cars of all versions, and despite an original plan of 300,000, the hatchback alone surpassed 780,000 units. Felicia, which replaced the Favorit in 1994, was developed with Volkswagen's involvement. But one glance at its silhouette is enough to see where it came from. Underneath was still the same first-generation front-wheel drive Skoda platform, stretched and refined to its limit. The base engine remained familiar, a 1.3-liter 4-cylinder with 54 or 68 horsepower. In 1995, the lineup expanded with a 1.6 MPI and a 1.9-liter diesel, both making 75 horsepower. The car was still inexpensive in its basic form, but higher trims offered things no one had expected from Skoda before. ABS, up to 4 airbags, power steering, air conditioning, a trip computer, heated seats, even leather upholstery. In 1995, Skoda added a wagon, and soon after came the commercial versions, Pickup and Van Plus. On that same platform, they built more than 4,000 bright yellow Felicia Fun models, aimed at people who wanted a workhorse that could also double as a toy for weekend adventures. But in essence, Felicia was a transitional model, a bridge that gave Skoda and the Volkswagen Group time to prepare a truly new chapter for the brand, the Octavia. I'll make a separate video about it. The story is worth it. And here's the real point. Today, Skoda is steadily moving up market, but its reputation for honest, dependable, down-to-earth cars was earned back then, in the Favorit era. The Favorit became the link between the past and the future Skoda might never have reached. Because if the company had kept modernizing its old rear-engine models, if the shift to a new platform hadn't happened when it did, there's no guarantee Skoda would have survived the 90s at all. It could easily have joined Trabant and Wartburg in the history books. But that didn't happen. The Favorit was designed, built, and put into production, and it pulled Skoda into a new era. And for that, it deserves a simple thanks. It arrived exactly when the company needed it most.